And finally tonight, the next in our conversations with Democratic and Republican presidential nomination candidates who are competing in the upcoming primaries. Judy Woodruff talks with Texas Republican Ron Paul, who has served 20 years in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Congressman Ron Paul, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You are somewhat of a sensation among young people in this country. You've broken all records for web searches. You're on MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, I guess more than just about any other candidate. With all due respect,
Be
you're
nice.
what, 72 years old. How do you explain it?
Young ideas. A fantastic idea about individual freedom and allowing people to do what they want and take care of their lives. Their lives belong to them, and get the government off their backs and offer them low taxes and make sure I never mess around with the internet. Don't tax the internet, don't regulate the internet. No, freedom is a very popular idea and young people love it. And they're open ideas, and they like principled answers to our problems. And older people seem to be stereotyped. You know, they get set in their ways, and they're not as open to the ideas of freedom. Yet, to me, freedom is a relatively new idea. It was an experiment, you know, with our country, but we have forgotten about it. And I'm reminding them about this great experiment of freedom, and they love it. And I am just so delighted when I see the young people coming.
They also seem to be attracted, among other things, to your position on the war in Iraq. You want to get U.S. troops out of there, not just get them out, but get them out as soon as possible. You're the only Republican running who has that position. Do you ever think there's something strange about the fact that you're the only member of your party running for president with that position?
Yeah, I wonder where they've gone, because just think how much benefit the Republicans have had on the position I hold now. Just think, I remember in the early years when I was voting, Eisenhower was popular to stop the war in Korea. Nixon was the one essentially to get the Vietnam War over. Didn't do a very good job, but that was why he was elected. George Bush ran on my platform, or I'm running on his platform. You know, a humble foreign policy and no nation building, don't police the world. So I think they have forgotten their roots, and they're hurting for it. I don't know why they turn against these views that I'm expressing, which are Republican views.
In all fairness, we should point out you're a libertarian as well. And what does that mean?
Well, I see myself as a Republican, the old right position. I'm a strict constitutionalist, but that means that you're a libertarian if you believe in the Constitution. But the old right, the Robert Taft, policies were similar to mine. That's very Republican. So I don't think this should be strange to the Republican position. Matter of fact, I think that's why we're getting so much support. I mean, just the other day, after the debates the other night, we went to the University of Michigan. We had 2,000 people show up. So I think it's a very popular viewpoint for Republicans. And they love the idea that you can be conservative and still be against the war and still be for civil liberties, and then also for free markets and balanced budgets. So this is a very Republican message.
On Iraq, as you know, the president, all your fellow Republicans say the U.S. has got to stay there in one form or another to fight Islamic extremism. Why are they wrong about that?
Because our presence there makes extremism worse. We're more vulnerable to terrorism because we're over there occupying their country, and they resent it. Our military's run down. We've spent $500 billion. We've lost all these men and women. We've had 40,000 serious casualties, and all we can do is dig in our heels and say, well, we can't leave because there'll be chaos. We've created chaos. The longer we stay, the more chaos and the more expenses we're going to have.
Do you think that if the U.S. left Iraq, pulled out of that region altogether, that the Islamic extremists would no longer be a threat to the United States? Is that what you're saying?
It wouldn't be that simple, because just moving away, you'd still have the problems and the resentments. They're not going to dissipate overnight. But I'm talking about a non-interventionist foreign policy. The founding fathers taught us about it. No entangling alliance. Don't get involved in internal affairs. If you eventually did that in the Middle East, yes, we would be less vulnerable. But just to back away a little bit and still have our puppet governments in Saudi Arabia support Israel against the Palestinians and be in Afghanistan, no, it's not going to change anything. As long as we have this mercantilistic idea that it's our oil, we have to be over there, we have to have of cheap oil, we're going to be resented. But you have to, as long as we keep doing what we're doing, it's going to get worse. If we start backing away, they might reassess things. But we're doomed to failure. And the Republican Party has already suffered the consequences because they, did so badly last year. And it's going to get worse if we don't change our policies.
How do you define the U.S. interests that are worth fighting for? If the U.S. shouldn't be in Iraq, shouldn't be, as you say, in these entangling alliances in Saudi Arabia and other countries, you've got U.S. troops now in South Korea, in Europe. What are the interests that the U.S. military?
They don't serve our interests. They just participate in our bankruptcy. We're spending $500 billion a year we don't have. It's part of the reasons we have a financial crisis, a dollar crisis going on right now. It's intertwined with our Federal Reserve System because we rely on the Federal Reserve to print this money and create money out of thin air. All empires end badly for economic reasons because you can't afford them. If you look out through all of history, eventually they collapse. And you may be militarily powerful, but eventually you undermine the finances. The Soviet system collapsed. I was drafted during the Cuban crisis. We thought we were going to have a hot war. We never did. The Soviet system collapsed, because they couldn't afford it and their system was non-viable. Our system isn't viable either. We can't have a current account deficit of $800 billion a year. We can't owe foreigners $2.7 trillion and think we can keep paying them interest and keep borrowing money. They'll quit doing it. And that's why the dollar's weakening. And that's why we face a major crisis. And all I want to do is stop it from collapsing. And that means you have to change foreign policy. You have to save a lot of money if we want to tide some people over here. The only way we can take care of the people who are sick and dependent on government programs is by cutting somewhere else. And I say we have to cut our empire back in order to save our economy here.
You do, as you are now, talk a lot, you talk often about cutting back the size of government. What is it, I mean, you've listed some of the things. What are the main things the government should stop doing that it is doing now?
Well, we should start doing only what we're authorized to do. We should read Article 1, Section 8 and find those 21 things that we're permitted to do and what Congress is permitted to act on. That means we would be doing about 80% of the wrong things, right now. But you can't turn it off like that. Like I already indicated, you don't need to put people out in the streets, that are dependent on the government. The easiest thing to change our plan on is don't accept this notion that it's our responsibility to police the world. It backfires on us. There's too many blowback consequences. There's unintended consequences, and the financials the big one. So we have to change that. But at home, why do we need a Department of Education? And why should we have this Department of Agriculture just to subsidize farmers? You take money from the taxpayers, you subsidize farmers, then the taxpayers pay for higher prices in the grocery store. And that's just coming alive again now because we're coming up with a lot of inflation once again.
You do away with the CIA, I saw. Is that correct?
Well,
or
not all the functions, but essentially so. The CIA is what gets us into trouble. I mean, the CIA is what really started things in the Middle East because the CIA went in and overthrew Mossadegh in 1953, and we put in the Shah. The CIA murdered Diem or participated in the overthrow of the government in Vietnam, which leads to trouble. It's a secret government. Congress has no idea what the CIA is doing because nobody knows other than what the CIA is. It is one thing that is not characteristic of a free society.
You would also do away with the Federal Reserve, and you mentioned the Department of Education and other things. You're not the first person to run for president who wanted a smaller government. Ronald Reagan, name comes immediately to mind. He was very popular as president, and yet even he had a very hard time getting government spending down in any serious way. Why do you believe you could do where he had a hard time?
I can't do it by myself. There has to be a consensus. I think this is what my campaign is finding out, that there is a consensus. People don't believe the government anymore. They think the government is that group of people who take money from us and pass it out in places like New Orleans and accomplish nothing. They don't see any success. They've given up. And young people especially don't expect to get any Social Security. So conditions are just ripe for this because we have an imminent bankruptcy coming on, and people are sensing this. This is why they quoted statistics the other night, like 70% of the people in this country say we're either in recession or going to be in recession, but nobody here in Washington knows about it. Nobody in Wall Street knows about it, but the people do, because there's something very, very strange going on, and it's the recognition that it's not working. And when it quits working, we have to have a new system. My goal is just to have a transition period so you don't have a collapse of the economy and a breakdown of the political system, which happens if you don't deal with this. And this is what's happened so many times over history.
Well, what is